Okay, there we go. Hi, everyone. I'm going to keep it short and sweet. As Brittany mentioned, I'm Josh Mueller, Deputy Director at Most. I'm just going to jump right into this. And as we have one more person filtering in here, I'm going to get right into this and talk about how to prepare a successful application. I know that folks probably have some questions, so I want to make sure we leave ample time for that at the end. So I will get right into it. Is my screen showing up okay for everyone? Great. Alrighty then. Well, hi there. This is our team here at Most on a somewhat windy day. If you join us, there'll be many like these in store. But let's get into it. So if you have started this process at all, then perhaps you've seen the timeline I'm showing here on our website. We'll make sure that we put that link up at the end. Nothing in this presentation is meant to be exclusive to this presentation, so hopefully you can find everything publicly. But we really just want to do our best to make sure that everything's accessible to you. So in the interest of that, here is the timeline. The key date to think about right now is March 15th at 5 p.m. CT. That's when applications are due, including letters of recommendation. So if you are not yet thinking about who might be a recommender for you, just keep in mind that we do need to have their portion of the application sent to us by this deadline as well. So after that, we're going to try to have a quick turnaround on evaluations for the first round and notify folks by April 1st whether or not you've been selected as a finalist. And then becoming a finalist entails sort of a two-part exercise. So we will host virtual interviews from May 1st through May 15th. Try to schedule on a date that accommodates your schedule. And then there's also a writing exercise. So we'll ask you to write a mock science note, which is our main product here at Most. So we want to assess your sort of familiarity with that product and ability to turn one around in a relatively short period of time. So that'll be the first stage should you earn a finalist spot after the initial application. And then by June 1st, we will announce the fellowship class. And then on September 1st, you will be able to join us here in Missouri. There are a few details along the way that I will now get into. But like Brittany said, if you have any questions, feel free to drop them in the chat on a rolling basis here, and I'll try to address them as I see them pop up. Okay, so the first thing to consider if you have our application page up and you're thinking about applying to Most for this upcoming year is the eligibility criteria. So the first thing to think about is citizenship or immigration status. We do need you to have sort of the legally required status to be working here for at least 1 year, should you choose to take the 1 year option, but potentially 2 years should you extend into that range. And then the second part of the eligibility status here that we will sort of assess on a case-by-case basis, but we're using this term terminal degree. So in a lot of cases so far that has meant PhD, but depending on your field, that might be an EdD, that could be an MD, that could be an MPH, MBA, MA, MS. It depends on both the position. So the legislative policy fellows to date have all had PhDs, whereas the executive fellowship is more focused on data management. And so potentially the terminal degree there is an MS. So we can work with you on this. This is a good time for you to ask questions about that sort of thing. But what we'll stress later on in this presentation is that the terminal degree is sort of a stand-in to let us know that you have experience doing high-level research and that you're comfortable sort of sorting through the literature in your field and then translating that to a non-technical audience. And then finally, relocation. So we're lucky to be working remote right now and have sort of a hybrid status, but the success of our program really does depend on these face-to-face interactions with lawmakers. So we have asked to date that everyone move to central Missouri. So we have a few fellows in Jefferson City, where the Capitol building is located, that you see on this slide. And then the bulk of our team is located in Columbia, Missouri, which is just a short drive north of there. Again, we can talk details about this, but as a general matter, these are the sort of 3 eligibility criteria that we are putting out there. Okay, Now the more fun stuff. Let's talk about what your application will look like. So the initial application, again, which is due on March 15th, has 5 components here. So we're going to walk through these one by one and try to give you a little bit more detail so that you're not guessing what we're looking for. Like Brittany said, we really don't want this to be some sort of secret knowledge. We want you to understand what we're looking for and then have the best shot possible at putting together the strongest application possible. So the first thing is a research summary, then 2 letters of recommendation, then a cover letter, a CV, and short answers to some questions that we'll talk about in a little bit more detail towards the end here. Please note the starred items, the cover letter and the short answers. These are the only portions of the application that differ should you be applying for the legislative versus the executive policy position, or both. So if you are applying for both, just make sure that your cover letter is that you have a separate cover letter for each of those positions and then separate short answers for those positions. If you go to the website page that is in the chat right now, you should see that the application packet looks different for the executive and legislative policy fellowship. But if you have any questions, again, let us know. Okay, so let's dive in. We're going to talk about these one by one. But first, that's right. One thing to keep in mind in sort of the back of your mind here, regardless of the portion of the application process that we're talking about, so those 5 portions, we're going to be evaluating those applications on these 8 different areas consistently. So we will talk at the end of the presentation in more detail about what we mean by all these, try to give you some definitions here. But loosely speaking, we will be judging those portions of the application on your interest in state level policy, your nonpartisan stance, your interpersonal skills, initiative and leadership, communication, DEI commitment, your topic area fit, and then your alignment with our core values. So we just want to put that up front so you have them sort of simmering, but then we'll give you a more detailed description of what those entail down the line. Okay, so now jumping into the specifics. The first portion of the application for the most policy fellowships is a research summary. We keep this fairly brief. I believe it's under 300 words. That is for a reason. So what I'm trying to show on this slide here is that as a most policy fellow, you're going to be asked to straddle the research community. And so there is a vibrant academic and private research scene here in Missouri. Shown on the map are some of those institutions, not all of them. You're going to be asked to straddle that world and the policy world. And so what that means is that this application is going to look a little different than the sort of traditional academic postdoctoral application. Frankly, we're not really going to ask you to try to impress us and dazzle us with your research experience by telling us about the high level of technical accomplishment that you've demonstrated. Of course, that helps, but what we really want is that you can tell us in sort of layman's terms, in clear and concise language, what sort of science you did, why it matters, and to make sure that you can communicate that to someone who has no sort of formal training in that area, because that's what your day-to-day is going to look like here. So that's what we're looking for in the research summary. Tell us what you did. If you can tell us maybe how it relates to policy, that's a bonus. But we really just want to see that you can take your, I'm sure, complicated science and boil it down into something that if we were to pass it to someone here in the legislature, that they would understand what you're talking about. Okay. And then the second portion here is the letters of recommendation. So we're asking for 2 letters of recommendation that, as a reminder, are due by that same deadline and should be emailed directly to me. So Brittany, if you could drop my email in the chat as a reminder, but this should also be in all the documents that you see. This is the only portion of the application that you won't sort of digitally staple together. We'll have these sent separately so they're blinded. But we've opted to go with standardized letters of recommendation this year. So you can find this document on our site, but here's a sample of what those entries look like in the letter of recommendation. So we've asked your 2 recommenders, and we do mean 2 recommenders. If we get any number of recommendations beyond 2, we're only going to be able to use the first 2. So please pay attention to that. But this is a sample of what your 2 recommenders will see. So I believe we have something like 16 or 17 different questions that are the same for every applicant and are the same between executive and legislative positions. And what we do is we ask your recommender to rate you relative to the to your sort of peer group, to the people that they have experience working with in the past, to rank you relative to them, and on this scale that is meant to be as sort of quantitatively rigorous as possible within their best judgment. There is a portion for sort of a short written section at the end, but we are well aware, as you probably are as well, of some of the lingering issues around letters of recommendation, whether it's biased language due to gender or race or ability status. And so we're trying to avoid that as best as possible and make something that is standardized across applicants. And so if you have any questions about this format, if you have not seen this before, if your recommender has questions about this format and would like to get in contact with us, we urge you to go ahead and get in touch with us. We'd be happy to clarify anything. But this is what the letters of rec look like for us. And we hope that makes it both easier for your recommenders to turn this around, since it's only a handful of questions, but then also makes it fairer for everyone in our process as well. Okay, number 3 is a cover letter. You all, being in the positions you're in right now, probably you may have some experience with a cover letter or a sort of letter of sort of interest or a research statement, personal statement, something like that. We're not asking for a particular format. I've demonstrated the sort of generic format on the right here. We're not asking for a particular format, but really what we care about is you answer these 4 questions on the left. Why are you applying to be a Most Policy Fellow? What do you bring to the program? Tell us a little bit about your past experiences and maybe your interest in science and technology policy, particularly at the state level. And then what do you hope to take away from this fellowship? We want to know a little bit about your immediate term, medium term, long-term plans as well. This is sort of your chance to shine, to show us a little bit about yourself, to show that you can write in a clear and concise manner as well. So for some advice on crafting your cover letter, I really do recommend this link at the bottom of the page. Purdue, their online writing lab is spectacular for almost any purpose that you might have where you're doing public writing, but they have a lot of resources dedicated specifically to cover letters. So if you sort of hew to their rules and suggestions, there won't be anything strange formatting wise, at least, about your submission. So I really would recommend that as well. Okay, and then number 4 is a CV. Again, we're not asking for a particular format. I've put mine here as sort of a sample format. We're flexible as long as it contains the information that we're asking for on the application page. Really want to know about your education, your work and research history, and then anything else that might make you a strong candidate for this program: awards, honors, volunteer experience, leadership potential, publications, things like that. I think probably, again, being in the positions you're in, you are familiar with the CV. You probably have one up to date if you are in the process of applying for other positions right now. So I won't belabor this point. I just wanted to make sure that it was on your mind that you do need an updated CV to apply for this position. And with that, I will now turn it over to Dr. Whitley to walk you through the one final writing portion of the application and then the evaluation criteria that we mentioned up front.
Great, thanks, Josh. So like Josh mentioned, the short answers are one of the parts of the application that differ between the legislative and executive fellowships. And so if you're applying to both, you're going to have to fill out the short answers for both applications. Similar to the cover letter, this is a place where you can really shine and highlight what's unique about you, what you bring to the team, and then also, of course, demonstrate that technical ability, whether that is communicating scientific topics clearly, writing concisely, that sort of thing. And so like Josh mentioned, we're actually going to go through each of those evaluation criteria here and talk about what they mean and what we're going to be looking for as we evaluate those on our own rubric. So let's go to that first list. All right. So as a reminder, these are the 8 evaluation areas that Josh introduced earlier on in the presentation. And so we're going to start by talking about this interest in state level policy and nonpartisan orientation. I think something that's really important and that we look for in every applicant that's probably not a surprise is we want to hire folks who are excited to work with the Missouri state government. And so I think this looks different depending on where you are. For example, I was not from Missouri when I applied for this fellowship, and so you don't necessarily need to be from here, but you should be able to articulate why this is a position that you're interested in doing, particularly at this level. Why are you applying to most and not to a federal fellowship or to an international fellowship? Also thinking about the nonpartisan orientation, this is central to the work that we do here at Most. I think some of you might have had experience already working with state, federal governments, maybe in an advocacy role, but we are kind of, it is so important to us to have this nonpartisan orientation so that you can go into the office of a Republican, a Democrat, and anywhere along that kind of political spectrum and have a respectful conversation with them. So we want to know that this is something that also aligns with your goals and is something that we think that you can do effectively. The next piece here, Josh just put a comment about this in the chat. I think also related to the nonpartisan orientation, we're thinking about things like interpersonal skills. And so this kind of incorporates a lot of different things. Professionalism, are you a person who, again, can go into a state senator's office and not talk down to them because maybe their political views differ with your personal political views? But also these interpersonal skills that are things like being able to work on a team. Are you good at collaboration? Are you able to work with a fellow with a different area of expertise than you to put out a science note that's a collaboration between the two of you? Are you kind of taking the initiative, also going down into this next point of looking for these relationships that you can make and use? I think the initiative and leadership piece here is really important because one of the things as a postdoc, we are expecting a lot of the work that you do to be self-driven. So you have Josh as a deputy director, and his job is to make sure that all the fellows know what they're doing and have support if they have questions. Josh is doing edits on science notes, helping folks get ready for testimony. But we also want to know that you're going to come into this position, be excited about it, and be able to kind of self-direct your work. So, you know, keep up with whether that looks like, you know, keeping up with the news or committee hearings or, you know, bills that are being released. And also this leadership piece. One of the things that I really liked, I actually started off, Josh and I both started off as Most Policy Fellows before we moved into our current roles. And I really was excited about the leadership potential here at Most because of the fact that we are relatively small and relatively new. So there's a lot of opportunities, I think, for you to show how your initiative and leadership might be a good fit to our team as we're thinking about growing and expanding. Communication skills is essential. This job is almost impossible to do if you can't communicate clearly. One of the things that we are consistently kind of up against is this perception that scientists are really bad about talking about their science. And so we're really looking for somebody who maybe has experience with using these different communication skills. And then also in the short answers that you're writing. I think how you respond to one of these short answers gives us a clue about, you know, are you able to get to the point and say that again, you know, concisely, clearly, without using jargon? You know, the goal here is not to show off how smart you are. If you're applying, like you are a smart, well qualified human being. We're really looking for folks who are able then to go have a conversation with a lawmaker or someone in our community and not make them feel less than, but just feel more empowered to use that information. This diversity, equity, and inclusion piece is central, and this is also going to relate down to our core values. We have made a commitment amongst our team to really center DEI efforts in all of the work that we do. And so this kind of shows itself in a few different ways, one of which is that we're committed to having an organizational culture that is welcoming to everybody. The other thing that we do that's really related to our policy work is thinking about inequities in policy challenges and policy solutions. Who is the most impacted by a policy problem? How might a policy solution, you know, disproportionately benefit or harm a certain group of people? And so if you have experience doing this in the work that you've done, you know, extracurricular, in your PhD research, this is something you're interested in, this is something very important to us, and we would love to see kind of how having you on the team is going to contribute to that culture that we're building here. This is basically a really short version of what other people use as, you know, kind of a diversity statement. Again, not so much what is your personal diversity, but kind of what is your commitment to diversity in the concept of our team, and also in the concept of nonpartisan policy. So let's go into our core values. I believe the next slide will have the list of our core values. This is something, as the name suggests, that core values are core to the work that we do here. Again, this is where equity comes in. Josh, you want to go to the next slide? And so here are those 6 core values here. And this is really what drives our organization. We actually every week at staff meeting check in and do core value shout outs, where we mention people in our group who have done something wonderful related to one of these values. These are on our website, but I'll go through them really quickly here. Evidence-informed decision-making is what we do. We are not trying to advocate. We are really trying to make sure that folks have the best information possible when they're making decisions. Transparency, we want it to be very clear where our resources come from, so references on science notes, also being open about, if science notes gets published and putting that on our website. This is also related to accessibility and that communication piece. So we want to make sure that if my grandma wants to know about a policy that's happening in her that would affect her county, can she go and look at a science note and also understand what's going on? You shouldn't have to have a PhD to kind of interact with the work we do. Collaboration, I think, also goes with the interdisciplinarity piece. This is collaboration with community groups. One of the things our fellows do a lot of is reach out to researchers in the state, other NGOs, community groups, business leaders, to talk with them about different problems that we're facing. And so the ability to collaborate with these groups and incorporate them into the work you're doing, and then also to collaborate with different disciplines. So for example, I think something that you might hear, especially if you've kind of started to get engaged in the policy world, is it's rare that a policy solution really only has one aspect. Like a transportation problem, for example, yes, has transportation, but maybe there's social elements that we need to consider, economic elements. And so how can you contribute to this, growing interdisciplinarity? And then I won't belabor the point about equity. I just talked about that before. Again, this is talking about internal equity within our team, and then also making sure that the notes that we produce are making sure that we are kind of being very intentional about talking about how different policies impact traditionally underserved or underrepresented communities. And then the very last evaluation area is topic area placement. I think this is a really good place to kind of end on, because I imagine that people will have some questions here. So we don't know, by the time that you submit your application, we will not know which fellowships will be open. This is based on the fact that our fellows get to choose whether or not they're going to stay for a second year. What we do know is that we will absolutely have 2 fellowship positions open for the next cohort. One of those fellows is currently an agriculture, conservation, natural resources, and economic development fellow. And then the other is our human services, public safety, and corrections fellow. Again, there might be an opening in another topic area, but at this point we won't know. So when we're talking about topic area placement here, we're looking at 2 things. 1, where did you do your research and what's your area of expertise? And then 2, how interested are you in other policy topics? Are you applying and the only way that you want to get placed is if you can be our health fellow? We want to know that. Or if you are, I'll use myself as an example. I got my PhD in molecular and cellular biology. I did my research in a biochemistry lab. When I applied for the most fellowship, I said, based on what I know, I think I would be a good health fellow. But I had said, here's the other things I've worked on that I'm really interested in. When I got the offer, I was asked to be our education and workforce development fellow. I now am education cheerleader #1. I think education policy is so cool, but it's important for us to know. We can also talk about this during the interview process about what your interests are. Again, I do not want this to be interpreted as, oh, well, the position that I would want is not one of those 2 that she mentioned, so I shouldn't apply. We really encourage everybody to apply regardless of what their interests are, and we promise to be transparent throughout the process. We will never hire you and say, I think you can do the thing you want to do, and then hire you and tell you you're doing something else. The offer will be made with that specific topic area in place. So with that, I think that's the end of the kind of pre-form presentation that we have. We have half an hour now. We are able to stay as long as there are questions. They can be big questions, small questions. There's few enough people on this call, I think, that we can get through a bunch. And so if anything that we said is kind of leaving question marks in your head, this would be a great time to ask. Yes, great question from Molly. So different topic areas for legislative and executive fellowships. I should have mentioned this. So the legislative fellowships, that's the one where we know the ag and the human services person will be leaving. Executive fellowships is really a question mark right now. And that's because we're waiting on funding. And so I think that the potentially open areas for executive fellowships will be either natural resources or health related. Again, there is a chance that that funding doesn't come through, in which case we would not have that variation in the executive fellowships. But I think if you're interested in the natural resources or the health side in the executive agencies, I would encourage you to apply, because if we get that funding, we have the resources to place someone there. We right now only have one executive fellow, and our goal is to get up to having 4 to 5 in the next couple years.
Yeah, I'll also briefly add that in the cohort that Brittany and I were part of as fellows, we did have one fellow that opted for only the 1-year fellowship, and then went and took another position after that. So there is always a possibility that there will be another opening. There will be another opening beyond what Brittany said, the sort of ag and natural resources, and then human services direction. That's something we can kind of talk through and work through throughout the process with you. But as of right now, exactly what Brittany said, we only know about those 2 positions for sure on the legislative side, at least.
I have 2 questions. So the first is, what is the source of your funding? And the second is, as far as placement after the fellowship, where do most of your fellows go?
Great questions. So we currently get most of our funding for the fellows program from a handful of family foundations. And so the James S. McDonald Foundation in St. Louis was one of our earliest investors, and they fund several fellowships for us. We also get funding from the Gordon and Betty Moore Foundation and the Chan Zuckerberg Initiative in California. Those are both foundations that have demonstrated kind of a general interest in these state policy, science and technology policy fellowships. So for example, CCST fellowship, Idaho, they're also receiving funding. Connecticut, also from these sources. For our executive fellowship right now, who's at Department of Labor actually funds that fellowship, and potentially some of the new executive fellowships we have will be funded by the agencies themselves. We are currently in the process of expanding our funding base, again, to have more fellows. And most of the places we are looking at to fund fellows are these kind of larger philanthropic organizations, primarily based in Missouri, but there's a few national ones that we're also looking at. And then the second question was, Josh, can you remind me? I got on a tangent.
It was where's placement for fellows?
So we have only one, well, okay, I guess technically we have 3 fellows alumni. 2 of your fellows alumni are on this call right now. So Josh and I both moved into leadership roles at most. So that's one piece. Our one fellow who left after the first year, she moved to Wisconsin to work with NASA as a project or program coordinator for one of their clean air initiatives. So she wanted to be kind of closer to family up there. And so she got this great job working, I think it's through the university, but it's the NASA office within that program, and is real happy there and getting to use kind of her science communication plus policy work doing there. A lot of our fellows, I think, have also considered potentially doing another, maybe a federal policy fellowship after doing the state. So I think some folks are maybe I don't know if I want to do state or federal, so let me do a year or two state and a year or two federal. But that's something that we don't quite have numbers for just because we're so young. Josh, do you want to take the next question in the chat?
Yeah, and let me tack one thing on, actually. I wanted to add on to what Brittany said as well, so unfortunately we have a low number of alums of the program currently, but from what we've gathered from application cycles in the past, when people are talking about their interests and why they want to be here at MOST, I think just about our entire team is really excited to stay in science policy for the long haul. That can take a lot of forms. That could mean science communication, that could mean science diplomacy. I think there are a lot of different paths leading out of MOST, but core to all of those sort of potential future placements is this real commitment to being in science policy and using this as a stepping stone to a career in that area. So hopefully that helps you a little bit as well. Okay, yes, I will also, let's move through these in the chat. So Molly asks, graduation set for May. Is there any early indicator before official June announcement that can help us make decisions about other employment or fellowship opportunities? Yeah, this is a really tricky one. I think a lot of us were in similar situations here. So my best advice to you is to just be in touch with us by email or phone. It's a small enough program, and we have a few positions open, but hopefully not 1,000 different applicants to try to sort all of the details out with. So if you have personal circumstances that might affect your timing or decision, please reach out to us by email or by phone, and we can work through that. As a general matter, I think we're going to try to stick to the deadlines that we have made public on the site, but then if there are any concerns that we can try to clear up for you, we'll be sure to stay in contact.
Two quick things about that. One, no one will look sideways at you if you call and ask. I actually did this when I got my fellowship offer for MOST. I called it was actually another fellowship, and said, hey, do you know, like, how am I going to choose? And they basically said, I can't guarantee. You probably should just take the other job because that's a guarantee. But I think the other thing that I just wanted to point out is we do try to coordinate with the other state policy fellowship programs so that notifications get sent out around the same time. Again, if you are trying to kind of determine, oh, well, I kind of want to go to Missouri and I also kind of want to go to Idaho, talk to us, let us know, and we can, try to give you as best of an idea as we can. But I think it's a good question, and it's something that gave me a lot of heartburn when I was applying for jobs. So we'll help you as much as we can.
Yeah, as a sort of informal aside, I'll say that it's no secret that the science policy community is pretty small and tight-knit. So it's not going to be a surprise to us if folks are applying for multiple positions in this sort of same realm. We are friendly with all of the other programs out there. It's a really supportive ecosystem. So we want to do as much as possible to support you and not make you feel like there's any sort of like politics or HR considerations that would stand in the way of you getting the best information to make a decision for yourself. Okay, Brittany, you want to go ahead, you take this next question.
All right. So we have a question from Holly about who's on the selection committee and who conducts the interviews. So we have thank you, Josh. I was going to get that link. So the link that Josh just put in is the link for our leadership. And what I would look at there is our Fellows Advisory Board. So we have a group of folks who help advise our Fellows program, and they are typically the ones that we bring in to help us do interviews. And so this means that if you are selected as a finalist to interview with MOST, the science note that you submit and your in-person interview will be evaluated always by Josh and I. We're going to be the constant. Josh and I will be at every interview, and we'll look at every science note, but then also by one, most likely two members of our Fellows Advisory Board. This usually varies based on their schedules. And so, for example, we'll have Dennis Ridenour from BioNexus come in and do 3 interviews, and then have Julie Masterson come in and do another couple. And so not everybody will get the same folks that they talk with, except everybody will get to talk with Josh and I. We think that's important to have that consistency across the evaluation process. Also, just to let you know, for example, like, you're going to be working with me. So it'd be interesting to see, if we can have a chat and how that goes. So that's how the selection process goes. The first round of applications is primarily screened by Josh and I, but we do usually get a little bit of outside help, whether that's from our Fellows Advisory Board or anonymous feedback from our fellows themselves. We also, this is something Josh and I have been working really hard on. We've been developing a standardized rubric. And so the goal here is that it's going to be really clear what we're looking for. What we don't want to happen, is if person A comes in and they're like a generally high scorer, like I am. I always give 3s, 4s, and 5s. But then person B gets another person to interview and they always give 2s and 3s. We do have a system in place, one, to try to make sure people are giving the same scores based on the same criteria, but also to standardize in case we have these differences. And so we don't want our applicants to be worried about, oh no, I got the hard one. And so they're gonna, speak less of me. We have a system in place to kind of address that.
Yeah, again, as an informal aside, I will say that we have a really great leadership team here at Most. They're in constant contact with us. They support all of our projects and our fellows. And so more than anything, I think we're excited for you to meet them during the interview process so you get a sense of what our team is like here.
I also just wanted to point out, because we were just talking about funding, anyone who gives us money is not allowed to select a fellow. So for example, if someone says, I'm going to fund the Health and Mental Health Policy Fellowship, that's great. We make them sign a document that says that they don't get to choose who that is. And so you won't have to worry about, kind of catering to a specific funder.
Okay, thanks for the question. And then we have a question from Rachel here in the chat. Do people often apply for both the executive and legislative fellowships? So this is kind of a difficult one to answer the exact question, because this is actually the first year that we have a sort of open application for executive branch positions. Our current executive branch policy fellow, Hannah Elder, kind of came to us very fortuitously, and it was a match that we made a little bit on the fly behind the scenes as sort of a pilot position. And so we actually have not had a call like this where we are simultaneously offering legislative and executive policy fellowships. So strictly the answer is no, but we do hope that if folks have both a data background and an interest in state level legislation, that they feel comfortable applying for both if they would like to. It's definitely not a disqualifier to throw your hat into both arenas.
Part of the reason we have it separate is because people like me would not be qualified to be an executive fellow. I did not have to work with any big data during my PhD. And so I can, the most complex code I've ever written was choosing a March Madness bracket, some teams for my March Madness bracket. And so this is so that, someone like me can go in and say, I just want to do legislative. But again, like Josh said, if you also have that data background and you're kind of fine either way, I think I would encourage you to apply for both.
Okay, thanks for the question. Another good question in the chat here regarding science notes writing. Does Most have access to scientific journals? So yes, we do. That is something that we will make sure is publicized. Should someone be selected as a finalist, we would be happy to share any resources that you're looking for, if that's part of the question here. But yes, institutionally we have access to scientific journals, and then for the purposes of the application process, we definitely don't want it to be a barrier if someone is not currently employed by an institution that also has access to those journals. So we'd be happy to track down anything you might be looking for and send that your way as well. Again, if I'm reading this question correctly, sort of preempting concerns, the best way to deal with anything along these lines is to email me, give me a call, and then we can figure out what resources are going to make the application process as smooth as possible for you. Thanks for the question.
I also think just not being affiliated with the university as we hire more people into the 501c3, because our founders founded this organization at the University of Missouri in Columbia, we expect to be able to keep this kind of honorary staff title, which will let us maintain access to those university resources, which are what our fellows use right now. These are great questions. What else do we have? Josh, do you have thoughts about Holly's question about suggested page limit for the CV?
I don't, because I'm going to be part of the evaluation process. I guess I could tell you like what my personal feelings are on it, but we don't have sort of official guidelines that are going to penalize you here. I think it is nice if you can tell us most of the story about yourself in 2 pages. So if you go to the application page, if you go to our most policyyinitiative.org/apply, you see what the sort of key pieces of information are that we're asking for. So I'd recommend that you get those up front on the first 2. If you have a really extensive publication history and volunteer history and employment history, and you want those to go on the sort of final pages there, and that drags you into 3, 4, 5 or beyond, that's totally fine. I think just the key is that whatever the length of your CV, you make sure it includes those key points that we're indicating explicitly on our application page.
I would also, just for kind of reviewer fatigue purposes, some of the advice I got when I was applying to things was to make sure that you put your most important stuff early, or kind of use different formatting to either bold or highlight. And so, for example, when I was applying to science policy fellowships, I actually created a new section in my CV that was kind of policy relevant work. And also consider that your CV, that if you're applying for an academic job, might have a lot of bullet points underneath your research to talk about all of the projects you did. That's less important here. And so I would just think about that. Again, we're not going to say, nope, we're not reading past the 2nd page. But I think the easier you make it for us to find those important parts on your CV, the more likely that is to help you out.
Okay, we have a question about benefits and logistics here. Brittany is our employment guru, so I'll let her take this one.
All right. So yes, the fellowship does include benefits. Something that we didn't mention up at the top is that the salary for fellows is $50,000. This is competitive with the other state policy fellowships. We make that salary around what everybody else is also paying. And we do provide benefits, health, dental. Right now through the university, our 401k, you don't vest until after 2 years. And so there's not any matching. We are trying to get this set up so that future fellows will immediately vest when they're paid through the nonprofit. This is more of a kind of logistical hurdle that we're doing as we move away from the university. But yes, you do get all of the benefits, including retirement. And then also vacation and sick days. Yes, we have kind of generous vacation policy. I want to say we have around 4 weeks of vacation is the standard that's on, especially when we've been being virtual. This is also pretty flexible. I know last summer a few of us did longer trips home to see family and did remote work for a few of those days to kind of keep up with things. And so this is something that you work with the deputy director on. We don't want to keep people away from doing things. I think our biggest goal here is, can you get the work done? Great. There's also, I will say, as it relates to vacation days, we do ask our fellows to try their very hardest not to schedule vacation between January and May, except for 1 week in the middle of that where the legislature is on recess. And this is just because the bulk of our work happens when the Missouri General Assembly is in session, and that happens only from January to May. And so we ask, unless there's a personal emergency or some other kind of extenuating circumstance, that the vacations are kind of reserved for the summer and winter months. Also, cost of living in Missouri is crazy low if you don't already live here. And so I moved from Seattle and was just blown away with what my stipend could get me here.
Yeah, I was actually going to say, Brittany, I know this is like an informational session to help folks out, but I'll be shameless and make the pitch for our program as well while I have you as a sort of captive audience. I really think that the program has done a good job of making these sort of quality of life considerations work out for us for the best. I am noticeably less sort of stressed and concerned about all of these sorts of factors than I was in grad school, and I came immediately from grad school into this position. So if that's any consolation. Obviously, I'm coming from a biased perspective here because I would love for all of you to join us. But I really have to say that, yeah, I think I appreciate how I've been treated by the program here along all of these lines.
Can you tell us a little bit about a day in the life for you both?
Josh, why don't you start this one?
Sure. So I love this. We're gonna have to make sure, Brittany, you can be my timer here, because once I start talking about this, I could probably go past our time limit. Yeah, just wave me down. So two-part sort of answer. So last year I was the Health and Mental Health Policy Fellow for MOST, and that role really breaks down into sort of two periods of life. So there's in session. The Missouri legislature is in session from January to May, and then there's out of session. Out of session is when the fellowship starts. So there's a little bit of time to get your bearings and get up to speed on the topic areas, figure out what happened last year, do a lot of reading, do a little bit of writing, do a lot of talking, a lot of meetings. This year we're fortunate enough to be able to do some travel around the state in person before the current Omicron wave sort of kicked off. So that was really nice. I felt like our new fellows this year really got a chance to learn about Missouri and see the state. So that was really great. And then in session, I think it is probably where I am going to have to be cut off. But in session, I would say that the sort of typical day in the early part of the week looks like first, keeping track of all the legislative goings on. So what legislation has been filed, what committees are meeting, what are they discussing, what debate did I miss from last week that I need to catch up on, what are the newspapers saying about these developments that can help me sort of strategize and figure out what things I should be keeping an eye on in the near future. So a lot of that, a lot of sort of organizational and logistical work, which gets back to these sort of application criteria that we're looking for about initiative and leadership and being diligent and having good communication skills. I think that is a lot of what this position looks like. And then on the policy side of things, once you sort of have topic areas that are your targets because a legislator has contacted you, or there's a committee hearing coming up, or you've been asked to provide testimony or something like that, then the other part of your life in session is putting those sort of research skills to task and learning about topic areas that you may not have known even existed very quickly, and then providing that sort of written and potentially verbal summary to partners here around the state. So that is a very brief version. Again, thanks, Brittany, for putting that in the chat. We would love to talk more about this if you have questions, so feel free to get in touch if you have specifics. But yeah, Brittany, how about you real quick?
Yeah, no, I think you did a good job. I'm thinking, in a day, let's say a committee announcement goes out and there's a bill that, could have research. The first step is getting in touch with the sponsor and figuring out if they want a science note. So you're potentially on the phone with the legislative office. Then you get the request and you're kind of doing the Google Scholar search to figure out what the research is. You might also then be emailing or calling someone at a university in Missouri to say, hey, it looks like you researched this. Can I get you on the phone for 15 minutes? One of our fellows is working on a note about fire protection districts right now. And she got someone from MU Extension on the phone to talk about kind of fire safety protocols. Something that I really liked and what I wanted to emphasize is that my network, I was our Education Workforce Development Fellow last year, the network of people I knew in Missouri just blew up when I started this job. And it was the research folks, it was people who work on education policy. I'm part of a working group right now with STEM STL, which is a group in St. Louis that focuses on STEM education. I have lunch with folks that are in the education policy space fairly regularly just to keep up to date with them. And so I think that was the thing that was the most exciting to me, is it's this mix of writing these science notes and then talking to people about science notes and just learning a ton of new things. And then again, I think the piece that Josh's day-to-day now is a lot more of making sure that the fellows have all the resources they need to do that. And my big day-to-day is making sure we have the money to do all of the things that we want to do. And so I've now shifted more into this kind of fundraising administrative role to make sure that the program can keep going and also expand. I think one of the things that I think about all of the time is just how do we get more fellows, because there's clearly a need for what we're doing. And so how do we get the money and the resources and the people to fulfill that need?
Yeah, I'll say we loved our positions as fellows so much that even with our different responsibilities right now, we're still trying to find ways to claw back some of that experience. So if we have the chance to watch committee hearings or show up or do some writing, we're still looking for opportunities to do that.
We have a few more minutes. I think we have time for a couple more questions. If we're out of questions, that's fine. I already put Josh's email in the chat. The key for the most folks is that our emails are our first name at mostpolicyinitiative.org. So if you want to email me, Brittany at mostpolicyinitiative.org. Josh is definitely, I think, the best go-to for questions. He'll probably get you a response a little bit faster. Yeah, any last minute questions? All right. Okay, I'm not seeing anything in the chat. Josh, is there any closing thoughts that you wanted to leave us?
No, I think just by being here and asking questions, being engaged, taking this all in, I think you folks are probably on the right path here. What we're looking for at most is people that are going to go out and really take charge a little bit of learning about science policy, of figuring out how to best serve both the state legislature here, but also the residents of Missouri. We take that very seriously, and a lot of that just means showing up and showing that you care. So we look forward to this application cycle. I hope we see your names and faces again. Like Brittany said, keep in touch with us if you have any particular questions. But if nothing else, then I think we can leave it with that.